Starfield's a game that's nearly bursting at the seams with mechanics from all kinds of different genres. Shooters, RPGs, survival crafters, space sims, the list can go on and on. The one that got my attention though is something you can interact with from the very beginning of the game, and it attempts to solve an issue that's plagued Bethesda's games for years. The mechanic being Starfield's oxygen meter, and the problem of weight management. In Bethesda's RPGs, rooms in rundown factories and castles have as much character as any of the NPCs you can find. These are examples of environmental art and storytelling which serve to make these worlds feel more lived in and help to immerse you in them. Anyone who's played an Elder Scrolls or Fallout game knows that looting items is as integral to the experience as shooting or dialoguing. This is because of several components, like a robust physics system and a grab mechanic, that allow you to interact with the clutter that makes up these scenes to create a tangible feeling of manipulating the game world that most other games don't even attempt to compete with. Another factor that contributes to this feeling is how these items are carried in your inventory. In many games, inventories are bound by a certain number of slots, and while items often take up more slots if they're perceived as larger or heavier, they never truly come across as anything even remotely realistic. On the other end of the spectrum, Bethesda's developers utilize a weight system, which associates every item with a weight like they would any other stat, like damage or value. You're given a soft weight limit, which can be raised through skills and perks, but can typically be passed by freely with a few consequences. The main problems with being overburdened are slower movement and an inability to fast travel. The first restricts your effectiveness in combat, and more importantly, putting more stuff in your pockets. The second mainly restricts your ability to travel around the game world quickly and get to an area where you can unload your newfound valuables on the nearest vendor. And in a game where you spend a substantial portion of your playtime sorting through your inventory to decide if that pack of cigarettes is really that important, they can both get incredibly annoying. They are, however, important because of a concept in game design called friction. Friction can be roughly defined as stuff a designer puts in the player's way to challenge them, force them to make tough decisions, or any number of other goals. Without friction, games would suck. Think about it. If you got given the BFG at the start of Doom, would it really be more satisfying than getting it after slaughtering hordes of demons with weaker weapons? It might be fun for a few moments, but the lack of meaningful difficulty or progression would quickly turn off most players. Funnily enough, Bethesda games actually let you create these moments by allowing you to dramatically reduce friction. In an effort to change how players contend with weight and add to the immersion of space, Bethesda implemented an oxygen meter into Starfield. At a base level, O2 acts as a stamina meter for the player that's reduced as the player sprints, jumps, or uses melee attacks. Unlike stamina in most games though, when oxygen runs out, you can keep running for a few more seconds with no consequences. During this time, the meter fills in with CO2 until it's maxed out. At this point, you start to lose health over time down to 1 HP, allowing you to have the option to trade health for speed at a moment's notice. Once you stop running, oxygen will start replenishing and carbon dioxide will deplete simultaneously. This iteration on stamina already has its own interesting implications for gameplay, but it gets even more interesting when weight is thrown in. Everything operates normally as long as your weight is under your current weight limit. As soon as you go over though, oxygen will deplete more rapidly when moving, depending on how much weight you're carrying over the limit. Plus, oxygen is now reduced when walking. This can get to the point where you can only move a few inches at a time. The important thing to note though is that you can still move freely with little movement penalties. And while you might not be able to fast travel while over encumbered like in other Bethesda games, this system gives you much more flexibility when moving around with enough gear to supply an army on your back. My favorite part about this is how it allows you to use counterplay to combat the weight system. In older Bethesda titles, your options for dealing with wanting to carry a lot of things are limited to increasing your carrying capacity through select perks and armor mods, using certain consumables, or just turning on God mode. If you've ever used the command console in one of these games, you know what I'm talking about. We've all been there, and even though it feels cheesy, it's the best way to get around a system that can feel like it's constantly fighting against you. In Starfield, the oxygen and carbon dioxide meter can be countered much more flexibly. To start, the methods from older titles are still here. Gear items can still be pocketed to increase capacity, and now they can even make certain types of items weigh less. Oxygen can also be modified by armor through attributes that increase your total amount, reduce overall consumption, or drain slower when encumbered. In this way, you can counter the weight limit by modifying weight or oxygen, giving you much more freedom in how you make choices with your armor. And perks and traits that modify oxygen and weight still exist too, if you don't want to dedicate valuable gear slots to it. The addition of the boost pack as a method of movement that doesn't spend oxygen lets you be much more fluid when carrying a ton of items. As the hours roll by, you'll quickly feel yourself getting into a rhythm of boost packing and sprinting to maximize your speed and oxygen usage. This becomes especially useful when hauling a bunch of stuff back to your ship through an enemy base, since you already have the feel for how both types of movement interact. Another counter to the oxygen meter can be found in one of Starfield's more spoilery aspects. If you don't know what I'm talking about, feel free to skip forward to this time in the video to avoid spoilers. So, one of the powers you can get from the temples is personal atmosphere. It makes all oxygen spending actions, like running, jumping, and melee attacking, free. More importantly, it basically removes the negative impact for being over-encumbered, allowing you to sprint around with hundreds of pounds to your heart's content. Obviously it's not a cure-all though. You still can't fast travel unless you're in your ship, and maintaining the nearly constant uptime on this power means you can't use any others since it uses so much space mana. Still, it's a very useful alternative for players who would otherwise be typing TGM into the console or installing mods to remove weight penalties. All of these aspects of counterplay combine to allow you the opportunity to utilize your game knowledge to get better at managing encumbrance. Knowing where to go when you're deep in a base or cave can help you find the most efficient way to get out by managing your oxygen. Creative use and timing of abilities like the boost pack give you more tools in your tool belt to overcome the issue. It's a much needed improvement from something like Skyrim system, where your options are sort through your inventory list for minutes to decide what stuff to drop, or make a long trek and crawl over to a vendor. When games as big as Starfield come out, it's easy to gloss over less flashy features for the ones on the back of the box, or more likely the ones on the bottom of the Steam page these days. And that's great actually. Some parts of a game just shouldn't be taking up the limelight. Like chances are, if you're noticing a game's camera, it's probably not a good thing. It's worth taking a look at these features though, because they can make games feel more seamless, interesting, and immersive. Starfield's oxygen meter does just that for Bethesda's traditional weight system, and shows that even long-standing mechanics can be worth iterating on.